second. Okay, we're carrying on with our Gemara and Sechet Sukkot. We're on Daf Memvav Omid Base 46b, and I'll point you to the right line in a moment. The Gemara has been dealing with various aspects of Arba Minim and also Sukkah. We've gone through quite a miscellany. We've been dealing with the brachot and how many brachot you make and when you make the brachot. But more recently, the previous week and perhaps the week before, we were talking about a form of muktzah that applies to the Arba Minim. And there was a discussion as to when that muktzah becomes relaxed or abates. And the form of muktzah was muktzah machmas mitzvah, because the Arba Minim are vehicles of carrying out a mitzvah. Then they are, so to speak, set aside and dedicated to that mitzvah. And they shouldn't be used for any other purpose other than the mitzvah during Sukkot, because that is their, if you like, the sole purpose to which they were dedicated when Sukkot came in. It's a form of muktzah, but it's not quite the same as the muktzah on a Shabbat, where you're not allowed to move things about. You can move things about, but the object needs to be used for the mitzvah. And if you were to take the esrog and decide you just want to eat it or to use it as a doorstop, then that would not be an appropriate use. It's muktzah for that. It is simply dedicated to the mitzvah of Arba Minim. And there was a discussion, in fact, was a machlokas as to when that muktzah disappears. So we take ourselves to the final day of Yom Tov, the 7th day of Sukkot. And in the morning, we make our final bracha on the lulav and esrog. Having done so, we're not going to use the lulav and esrog again. In fact, we may never use this lulav and esrog again. We may use it to burn in our biur chometz next Pesach, but we're certainly not going to use it again for a mitzvah. So does that lulav and esrog now become usable immediately after the final mitzvah has been done with them, which might mean 10 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whenever you do the bracha and you have been mekayem the last mitzvah? Or do we say that that muktzah is not lifted until the night time, the end of the 7th day, when stars come in for Shmini Atzeres, which is a different possibility, and one that is normally the rule for a muktzah in relation to Shabbat. Generally, we say that if something is muktzah when Friday night comes, which is Shabbos coming in, then it remains muktzah, even if there are circumstances to say it could be used again, it remains muktzah until Motzei Shabbat. And therefore, possibly we should say that the lulav and esrog aren't usable for any other reason other than the mitzvah until Motzei Chag. So is it to be straight after the final taking of the lulav and esrog, the final fulfillment of the mitzvah on day 7, or do you have to wait till the end of day 7? Now we're going to come back to this machlokas in a few minutes' time, but the Gemara is now going to be interrupted with a bit of a typical diversion to allow you to relax a bit before we get back again to the topic of muktzah. But we will return to it, and this will be the topic, therefore, will become, in terms of the lomdus of the Gemara later on, do you wait to the end of the day, or can you say that the muktzah is released straight away? But let's make our little bit of a diversion first. And I'm going to pick up the Gemara now. It's actually on Aleph Reish Zera, Omer Rebbe Zera, which unfortunately means counting from the bottom of the page is a bit further than halfway down on a 46b Memvav on a base. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. I think it's 22 lines up from the bottom of the page. The first word on that line is le'ochla. It says le'ochla kol shiva. You can imagine there's a full stop after shiva. And then there's Aleph Reish Zera. Our Reish is always the Omer Rebbe. So Omer Rebbe Zera. Rabbi Zera, why are we mentioning the next halacha, by the way, and the one that will follow? Purely because Rabbi Zera was the last Amora we spoke about, and he had something to say about this muktzah stuff. And having mentioned his name, if you like, we bring in another little compendium of halachot that he gave, whether or not they're in any way associated with the previous. This is one of those random walks that the Gemara sometimes makes. This time it isn't so random because it is, as a matter of fact, about lulav and esrog, but that's more of a coincidence than anything else. So let's see what the halakha is. Amar Rabbi Zera, lo likni inish hoshana liyanuka b'yoma tova kama. We've learned this actually previously. We came across it, let's put it this way, several times in the last couple of years, if I may go back as far, in Masechet Sukkah. Rabbi Zera says that an adult should not give over his lulav and esrog. Where it says Hoshana, it really means his lulav and esrog. It uses a word very loosely here. Liyanuka, to a young child, b'yoma tova kama, on the first day of Yom Tov. 1 second, I'm going to have to close the door because I'm getting an echo. Okay, done. On the first day of Sukkot, you shouldn't give over your arba minim to a young child on the first day of Sukkot if you have not yet been yotzei your own mitzvah. In other words, don't give it to them first. Why? As the Gemara explains, my tama, what's the reason for this? First, at least you should do your own mitzvah and only then give it over to the child. Why shouldn't you do it the other way? Because the yanuka mikna koni aknuyu lo makni. Because a young child, a yanuka, actually yanuka and yonek, someone, a woman who suckles her baby is a meineket, and the baby that is suckling is the yanuka. But it doesn't really mean a baby. It means a young child, probably under the age of 5 or 6. You shouldn't give it over to a young child because a young child is able to acquire, but aknuya lo makni is not able to give over possession. The ishtakach. And if you give it to him first, therefore, and he, so to speak, makes a bit of a noddy brocha, a Mickey Mouse brocha, and you want to be machanechim, you do this because you want to educate him, ishtakach, it will turn out, kol nofik belulav she'eno shalo. When you then take it back and you wish to make a brocha, you're actually making a brocha on a lulav that now doesn't belong to you, somebody else's lulav. And you know, on the first day, we say that you have to make it, it has to be your own. It can't be your son's either. Over here, the point is that we're in a bit of a bind. When you give over the lulav and esrog to the young child has a power of acquisition. We'll see why in a moment. He is allowed to acquire, which means it legitimately belongs to the child. Midrabanan, rabbinically, they gave him a right to acquire, which itself is quite an extraordinary thing, that a child should have power of possession. We're talking here about having legal title to an object. So he has legal title to the lulav you give him, this 5-year-old. Unfortunately, he does not have the halachic capacity to give back title to anyone, to the person who gave it to him or to any other third party, which means that once you've given it to him, Jewish halachically, legally, he remains the owner of that lulav forever. It makes no difference if you grab it back from him. You may well grab it back from him. But if you do so, if I wouldn't call you a thief for doing it, maybe you would be a thief for doing it. Nevertheless, even if you weren't a thief, it wouldn't be any better than you borrowing it from him. He is now the owner of that lulav and esrog, this little 5-year-old shrimp. And you are not allowed to make a bracha on a lulav and esrog that doesn't belong to you on the first day of Sukkot. So you're done now. You'll have to go out and buy a new lulav and esrog. So therefore, Rabbi Zera says, first, at least be yotzei your own bracha, and that way you've done your mitzvah for that day. And then you can give it to him and he can take it. If he can't give it back, big deal. You've already done your first mitzvah in our Torah. It's not so bad. But to give it to him first means he possesses it. It's a one-way, it's a bit like a valve. Possession can go into him, but it can't come back from him. Very curious. So in fact, I think I talked a little bit about this. They really gave possession to a child, the power of possession to a child, which itself is a novel thing. Chazal gave them possession, even though in Torah, you could say that a young child should have no power to own anything. That is, legitimately. I'm not talking about whether he takes something or not. He should have no legal power to say it's his. However, Chachamim gave legal power, and the Gemara in Gittin says that it was a takana mishum darkei shalom, very unusual thing. The sages decided that there were a number of things that they needed to institute in order to maintain social balance, social welfare, and a civilized society. And one of many, many, many such takanot was to give a young child of, at least if he knows roughly what he's doing, some level of legal title. And the context in which they originally gave this, by the way, was for a metzia, an aveda. So if there's an article in the street, you know, and it's a gleaming gold jug or something, maybe worth a fortune, maybe worth nothing, but it's very attractive to a young child. So you have your 5-year-old goes over, he sees it, picks it up from the street. The easiest thing in the world would be for an adult to give him a punch around the face and to take this jug away from him. Now he's the prime owner of that jug. Chazal didn't like that. Essentially, finders keepers, even for a young child, don't exploit people. And so therefore they said that if he picks up that article, it is legitimately his, and the rabbis can return the article to him if someone grabs it from him. What this young child will do, maybe he'll just throw it into the river, no one knows. That's not our problem. The fact is he's given possession. And more so, they said it's necessary. Unfortunately, we're going back to a society where not every child was necessarily well looked after. And you had these little child vagabonds in the street, go back to Charles Dickens, right? And, you know, some of them maybe would have been pocket thieves, others would have been trading in matches, you know, buttons, the sorts of things, merchants at little stalls. These could be 5 or 6-year-olds. And if they weren't allowed to do this, they wouldn't be able to earn a living. So therefore, Chazal gave them a form of rabbinic power of possession, and even a rabbinic power to give over, to buy and sell. They were given commercial rights to buy and sell, which means you would legally give them money, they would legally give you the object. If they wanted to buy from you, they would legally acquire from you and pay you. Obviously, one shouldn't exploit them, but some children actually were able to keep alive by their own ingenuity, if you like, living on the streets in this way. So it was a takana for the welfare of children. Nowadays we say, oh my goodness, I can have child labor. But before you think about the problem of child labor, think about the problem of child starvation. And this is not an issue in those days. They didn't necessarily all go to school. If they went to school, it was part-time, it was cheder, or whatever it was. Anyway, so therefore they granted certain powers. But the problem was, when it comes to giving something back, you need a das. If you think about it, a lot of this has got to do with mind over matter. If someone gives me something, they are free will through their mind giving it to me. I put it in my hand, I take it. I do not have to be a genius to know I'm holding something. On the other hand, if I'm going to give something back, I need to decide in my own mind, give something to someone else, that I am willing to concede what I have. So you can see why, if you like, intellectually, it's easier to receive a gift than it is to grant something. And therefore, they didn't want to give a child the full powers of granting. So they gave them some commercial rights. It's quite subtle. But these certainly, the most you could say for a young child is that they might have a rabbinical right to hand over something that they have to someone else and grant possession of what they had to someone else. But in order to fulfill a Torah mitzvah of Arba Minim, you need to be the Torah owner. So you have the child, at most he has a rabbinical right to return you the lulav and esrog and make that legitimate. But you may then now be the proud rabbinical legitimate owner of a lulav and esrog, with which you now want to fulfill your Torah obligation. This is apples and pears. Doesn't work very well. And therefore, don't give it to the child first. That's what's going on behind the scenes over here. And this is what Rabbi Zera is saying. And that's our halakha today nowadays. It would say on the first day of Sukkot, don't give it to your child too early. I mean, if he just picks it up, that doesn't matter. It's not. But if you grant it to him, if you grant it to him mentally, then you have this situation where you may not be able to receive it back from him legitimately in a Torah-based transaction. It essentially belongs to your child from now and whenever he wishes to dispose of it. That's the Gemara's statement here in the name of Rabbi Zera. Okay, that's that. Now, this is somewhat relevant to Sukkot, obviously, although it was nothing to do with Muktzah. We're going to come back to Muktzah later on. Now we're going to have another statement from Rabbi Zera, which is totally irrelevant to our conversation, but is absolutely charming and may well make you think that you've been bad parents or grandparents or great-grandparents. Let's read the next statement. Omer Rabbi Zera, the Omer Rabbi Zera, he said the following. Lo lema inish liyanuka, again, it's got to do with a young child. Let a person not say to a young child, do yahivna loch midi, below yohivle, I'm going to give you something, and he doesn't give it to him. And it doesn't matter whether it's his own child or to another child. Right? Your child is driving you mad. He's nagging you. So you say, oh, in a few minutes, I'll give you, I don't know, a model car, or we'll buy you a sweet, or I'll open a pack of crisps. And you do this only to push him off. And then a few minutes later, he says, no, where is it? And you say, no, it's not serious, just go to bed, or whatever it is. The Gemara says you're not allowed to do that. You are just not allowed to do this. It doesn't matter whether he's 3-year-old or whether he's 15-year-old. You're not allowed to do this. Why? Mishum da'osi la'agmure shikra. Because he will grow up to learn that it is okay to lie. Something as trivial as that is going to feed him with the wrong understanding about what it is to say the truth. You should keep away from sheker. Over here, you can see, even from sheker, which is innocently stated in order to push off a child. And it's not like, no, is it lying to a child? Lying, you could say it's just a question of the way you negotiate with a child. But this is not negotiation that is permitted. That's what the Gemara says. Shenema, how do we know this? Well, you might well say we already know it because we've learned it. He'll learn to be a liar. But the Gemara, as I always say to you, likes to quote a verse. And it quotes a verse from Jeremiah. Limdu lishonom, or lamdu lishonom diber sheker. Limdu lishonom, it could be. Their tongues were taught to speak falsehoods. And this is a critique of Am Yisrael. So don't do anything which is going to teach your tongue to speak falsehoods. Actually, some of the commentators over here have a problem, because the way the Gemara explains it, the problem is that the child will grow up to be a liar, because he can see that a word is not a bond, so to speak. It can be broken. But the commentators say, well, what about the adult who says it? If you keep telling lies, even if you do so innocently to someone, doesn't it have an impact on your way of thinking? Could it not essentially make you less of an honest person? And the answer is yes. In fact, therefore, there is a downside, both as far as the child who's educated to pick up that a falsehood is really not such a bad thing. Under many circumstances, you can make assurances that you don't have to keep, but also the parent who makes that assurance with every time he's able to make such a statement, if you like, sheker becomes a bit easier for him, until eventually it becomes easy to lie in a face-to-face situation with an adult. So it works badly in both ways. I'll just share the posset with you from Yirmiyahu, only because I think sometimes it's interesting to see where the Gemara brings its proofs from. Well, you can see the proof here is from Limdu Lishonom Diber Sheker. It's in yellow over here. What's interesting is This is a terribly distressing set of paragraphs in which dear old Jeremiah, who is always castigating Klal Yisrael, does so, and he's on top form in these psukim, as we will see. Of course, Yirmiyahu was the Navi who was the witness to the Chorban Bais Rishon and the Golas into Bovel. And so he explains why all this is happening. And I just love these psukim. I mean, if you really are a miserable person, this really will put you in a very good state for the rest of the day. Miyad Neli Bamidbar. This is Yirmiyahu. What would I give to be in the wilderness, Malone Orchim, in a hotel where there are guests, a lodging house? Ve'ez v'razami. How much I would like to leave my people. Va'elchami Tom, go away from them. Ki kulam menoafim atzeres bodim. Famous words here. For they are all, if you like, adulterers and a band of bandits or a band of traitors. Vayidrechu es lishonom kashtom sheker. They have twisted their tongues into bows of falsehood, bow and arrow. Twist, you know, the bow is curved, their tongues are twisted, right? Used to say, what are the, where didn't you used to say, white man speaks with forked tongue, right? Over here, we see that the criticism is that people twist their tongues. For lo le'emunah gavru ba'aretz, they only prevail in the land through lack of emunah, through non-faithful means. Ki me'ro'a yotzou, they have come out from evil. For osi lo yodou, and me they do not acknowledge Na'um Hashem is God's word. I'm not sure, I may have missed a little bit of the passage on El Ra. I'm not sure what this is. Let's look at the next one. Ishmeru Ehu Hishomeru. Each person needs to take care from his fellow because he can't trust him. But al kol och al tivtachu. Do not trust man, his brother. Ki chol och okov Yaakov. Yaakov, Akev, okov means twisted. Every brother is twisted into circles. V'chol rea rochil yahaloch. And every friend, every colleague is a talebearer and walks in talebearing. The ish borei ehu yehotolu yehotelu. Each person twists and lies and is deceitful against his fellow man. Ve'emes lo yadaberu, and speaks no truth. Limdu lishonom, they have taught their tongues, daber shaka, to speak falsehoods, hey over nilu, and they have elevated, if you like, their perversity or whatever it is. So limdu lishonom daber shaka, that's where it comes in. So the Gemara's quote is from a very dramatic set of verses of Yirmiyahu. You might have thought this quote would come from Mishlei or Tilim or something. It would be just a nice thing. Just be careful, don't speak falsehoods. But you can see it's part of a diatribe against Klal Yisrael for the way in which they have been unfaithful to him. Okay, you know, for many people, including me, myself, the only nach I learn properly is through learning Gemara. If I didn't look up these psukim and I just took the 4 words here, Limdu Lashonom Dibe Sheker, I wouldn't even have learned those 4 psukim in Yirmiyahu. It's sad, isn't it? But there isn't that much Tanakh learned or taught. There's much more of it today than there used to be. Much more of it today than there used to be. When I grew up, if you had to know any Tanakh, it's either because you were learning biblical Hebrew as a language, not as the Tanakh, or because you were, must say, wasting your time when you should have been learning Gemara. Sad. Anyway, but at least it gives us some opportunity to learn Tanakh together. So therefore, don't lie to a child because it'll come back and bite and just see what happens. You I had a child that leads to Chorban Bais Rishon if you take Yirmiyahu's words at face value. Okay, now we're going to go back to the discussion on when does the muktzah of muktzah the mitzvah come to an end? Is it after you've done the mitzvah on the last day, or is it at the end of the last day? Do you have to wait until stars come out at the end of the day before you can take this lovely esrog and grind it into jam or whatever you want to do? Okay, now the Gemara says, Uber plukta to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. The argument that we've so far been discussing is the same argument as an argument which we're about to put now in the next Gemara between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Just in terms of the style of the Gemara, it's very strange. The Gemara has picked this up in the middle of a sentence. Ubiplukta. We've just gone through this diversion. And ubiplukta sounds as though we haven't gone through a diversion at all. If we'd had no diversion and we were talking about muksa, you could then go on and say, and Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish also argue in the same topic. But we just interrupted the topic with talking about speaking lies to kids and whether you can give over your lulav and esrog to a kid. So you have to sort of bring your mind back again. You come back woken up with a start. We're going right back to something, but without a clue until we read the next Gemara. What is this machlokus between Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish? To Itma, because it was said that the following was their argument with Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish. And it's a very strange case in a sense. Just to show you what people used to do. Hifrish shiva esrogin, the shiva yomim. Let's say a person decides that it's not enough for him to have one esrog. Yeah, I don't know, maybe he's seen a lot of beautiful esrog. You know what he says? I'm going to have one esrog per day. Each day, I'm going to make my bracha on a new esrog. I haven't met anyone who's quite as medayik as this nowadays. Nothing wrong with any of my esrogim, but I'm deciding each day I'm going to take a fresh esrog. So he sets them aside, one esrog for each day of the 7 days of Sukkot. So Rav Omar, kol achas v'achas yotze bo. Rav says each person, each day after you've been yotzer in the mitzvah of that day, he is able to eat the esrog straight away. Why? Because he said to himself, day one, I'm taking esrog A. So he's used esrog A. Immediately he's used it. La'alter means immediately, not at the end of the day. So you can see where we're going from. This is an opinion which says, if you set aside something for today, as soon as the mitzvah is done, it's done, and you can now make use of that esrog. So you can eat it straight away. It's nice, isn't it? You can have it for lunch, for jam, or something. But Rav Asi Omar, kol achas, one second, kol achas v'achas yotze ba v'ochla l'mocha. Each one of those esrogim, he's yotze on the day, but he can only eat today's on the next morning. It's exactly parallel arguments. So if I've used esrog A on day one, then on day two, I only in the morning of day two, which when he says in the morning, really, he could eat it in the night as well, it would seem, because as soon as the day's out, it's the stars out on the first day, it would seem to be all right. But when he says ad lemochar, he means the next halachic day he's allowed to eat the esrog, but not when he's done the mitzvah on the esrog. So esrog A is osir until day two. And the Gemara says, "But my kamifligi." What is the basis or the rationale of the argument? And it's the one that we mentioned before. This is Rav. We got Rav here and Ravasi. Rav says he holds le mitzvah so iskatzoi, that the muktzah only lasts during the period that you're going to do a mitzvah with it. But once you've fulfilled the mitzvah, so to speak, the muktzah status expires, and therefore you can eat it straight away. Umar Ravasi, he's the one now. Sava, he holds l'chulu yoma iskatzoi, that once it's muktzah at the beginning of the day, that status of muktzah remains for the whole day until the next morning. So over here, you see no more than another argument, but in a slightly different context. Whether you have an esrog each day, or whether we talk about the last day of Sukkot with an esrog, the basic halacha is, when does muktzah the mitzvah end? Is it when you have fulfilled the mitzvah, or do you have to wait for the expiration of the day before it becomes mutter for you to use in another way? Okay, now the Gemara is going to move on to a topic which we've probably forgotten. And that topic is Chutz Loretz, 2 days Yom Tov. Every now and again, the Gemara weaves in, what does it mean to us? And when the Gemara says, what does it mean to us, as the Gemara will put it so nicely in a moment, the Gemara means, now that we're in Bovel, we're talking about Talmud Bavli, not an Eretz Yisrael. This was Talmud Yerushalmi. This next piece of Gemara wouldn't apply. But we're talking here Talmud Bavli and Chutz Loretz, and they have 2 days Yom Tov, just like we had when we were in the States or in Europe. So now the Gemara asks, for Anam, de Islon Trey Yumi, that we hold of 2 days Yom Tov, which means essentially we keep 2 days at the beginning and 2 days at the end. Heichi of Dinam, how should we conduct ourselves? When should, for us in Bovel, the esrog on the final day, let's ignore the case of one each day. That was just a bit of a red herring case. The normal case on the final day, when should it become mutter to eat? We'll see what the sides are over here. So Amar Abaye, so Abaye said, Shmini, Shmini Sofik Shvi. You would be able to eat the esrog on Shmini, this 8th day, which even in Chutz Loretz is Shmini Atzeres, but which happens to also be a Sofik, the 7th day of Sukkot, because every day during the in Chutz Loretz is day, like you have day 3 could also be day 2, day 4 could also be day 3, and we reflect that in the Musaf when we say those strange, we say by Yom Hamishi and by Yom Hashishi and then Yom Hashishi, Yom Hashvi, because it's what we call the Speika Diyoma. We don't really know in Chutz Loretz, or we pretend we don't know. Of course we know nowadays, but we keep on this pretense as a minhag that we don't know which was the real first day of Yom Tov. And because we don't know which was the real first day, we don't know which was the real 6th day. So when we have the first 2 days of Sukkot, the 2nd day could be the first day, we say to ourselves, or could actually be the 2nd day, right? So we have this doubt. So the 8th day could be real Shmini Atzeres in the Chutz Loretz, as it is in Israel, or it might actually only be the 7th day. So we don't really know, and we pretend we don't know. So he says you're allowed to eat the esrog on the 8th day. And remember, on the 8th day, even Chutz Loretz, they don't take lulav and esrog. By the way, there's going to be a question on this in a moment. Why don't they take lulav and esrog? Why did we not take lulav and esrog when we were in Chutz Loretz on the 8th day Shmini Atzeres? In fact, the fact that there's another day coming, Simchas Torah could be Shmini Atzeres and Chutz Loretz. When it comes to the Shmini Atzeres that we call Shmini Atzeres and Chutz Loretz, really, halachically, there's a safek that could actually be the 7th day of Sukkot. If the 2nd day of Yom Tov had really been the first day, then what we call Shmini Atzeres could really only be the 7th day. And if it's the 7th day, then we should be taking al safek at least. We should be taking lulav and esrog. Maybe we should be taking lulav and esrog without a bracha, because maybe it's really the 7th day of Sukkot. You have to take lulav and esrog for 7 days. Well, here, on the Shmini Atzeres, we don't take it anymore. The question will arise in a moment, because we do, to some extent, sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres in Chutz Loretz. Not on, I know some people are waving their heads because it's subject to so many minhagim, but the Gemara is going to say later on, which is a halacha for some people, but not for other people, that on Shmini Atzeres you sit in the sukkah, but you don't make a bracha. Shmini Atzeres, not Simchas Torah, but on Shmini, some people, there's all manner of minhagim. Some people go in and make kiddush just on the night. Some people come in and make kiddush in the day and go into the house. Some people eat all day until the afternoon on Shmini Atzeres, which is like the Gemara. Why? It's Shmini Atzeres. I've just said Shmini Atzeres Chag Hazeh. I haven't said it's Chag HaSukkos. So what am I doing sitting in the sukkah? Because it's Sofik 7th day in Chutz Loretz. And therefore I sit in there as a Sofik. I might as well do it. If I'm going to sit in the house, I might as well sit in the sukkah. Of course, I'm freezing cold in the sukkah in Chutz La'aretz, but that's another matter. But if I'm not, that there's a much bigger heter to sit in the house if the weather's bad on Shmini Atzeres, even if you have the minhag to sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, because because it's a sofek anyway. So therefore, we do technically sit in the sukkah even without a bracha on Shmini Atzeres, because it's a sofek seventh day. Sukkot hath 7 days. If that's the case, why don't we take a lulav and esrog? Okay, it's just not being consistent. We'll have to see later on why there is such a difference. We don't take lulav and esrog. However, let's go back again to the question over here. Some of these sit side by side. Abaye says that on the 8th day of Yom Tov, which is Shmini Atzeres in Chutz La'aretz, but it's also Sofek Shvi'i, you are already allowed to eat the esrog. Now that is actually a bit surprising in a sense, because as I said to you, it's the Sofek 7th day. It's the Sofek 7th day. And you're allowed to eat the esrog. Hang on, isn't Sukkot the 7th day? Why isn't it still muktzah the mitzvah? So Abaye holds, yes, it is the Sofek 7th day, but since we are not actually taking lulav and esrog, for a reason we're going to have to try and explain, we don't actually bench lulav and esrog. There's no mitzvah to do on a day. Technically, Shmini Atzeres is a Sofek 7th day, but since it's not a Sofek on which we take the lulav and esrog, we can still eat it straight away. That's Abaye. And some Abaye, Shmini Sofek Shvi. No, I've got it the wrong way around, I'm afraid to say. Abaye says the opposite. Shmini Sofek Shvi also. I've got this the wrong way around, but the argument will apply now to Merema. The Shmini Sofek Shvi, because it's a Sofek Shvi and there's a Sofek, it's the 7th day, also, you're not allowed to eat it, even though you don't take the lulav and esrog. But since technically it's a Sofek that it's the 7th day, it would be an insult to eat the esrog when it could still be Sukkot. Chi Sofek Shmini Mutter. Simchas Torah, the 9th day, it doesn't call it Simchas Torah, it's the 9th day. This is quite confusing. I'm sorry about these numbers. The 9th day of Yom Tov, which in Chutz La'aretz is Simchas Torah, which is a Sofek that it's Shmini Atzeres, but no way is it Sukkos anymore. Mutter. Then I say, Abaye says, is mutter to eat. You can eat it only on Simchas Torah. But Merema, he argues differently. Afili Shmini Sofek Shvi mutter. He says that you can even eat it on Shmini Atzeres. Sofek 7th day. How can you eat it? You eat it because you are, after all, not going to take lulav and esrog and make a bracha. That seems to be the situation. Now, I'm not sure I'm going to make this any clearer.
I was asked a question.
Yes.
I'm a little confused. Wow. In La'aretz, where we have 2 days, are the 2 days then considered 1 day?
No, absolutely not. They're not. Only Rosh Hashanah do we say that it's
the 7th day.
1 day.
Only then could it. I guess it's not clear to me.
Each day is considered to be a separate day, but there is a suffix of what that day is.
Right, that I understand.
You don't have to worry about it and sit there banging your head against the wall.
I'm confused about the 7th day, which seems to me, well, I don't know. I guess I have to figure it out.
Well, okay, here's a table. Ignore Eretz Yisrael, which is just, well, let's not ignore it. It's not clear. Day 7 of Yom Tov, day 8 of Yom Tov, day 9 of Yom Tov.
Right.
If you're in Eretz Yisrael, top line, then the day 7 of Yom Tov is a day 7 of Sukkot. There's no possibility it could be this, that, and the other. That's the definition in Eretz Yisrael, that the 7th day of Yom Tov is, the 7th day of Yom Tov as we experience it is called day 7. Day 8 of Yom Tov in Eretz Yisrael is Shmini Atzeres. Day 9 is a weekday. Yeah? Day 9 is a weekday because we don't have a day 9. There's no Simchas Torah in Eretz Yisrael. It's Shmini Atzeres, SA. I call SA over here. So day 9 is a weekday. In Chutz La'aretz, the 7th day of Yom Tov is technically either the 6th day of Sukkot or the 7th day. Now you can jump up and down and say, it's the 7th day. I'm just keeping my day 7. What is it? The day 1 might have been a chol, might have been a weekday on this basis. You don't know whether the 7th day of Yom Tov and Chutz La'aretz, underlying the rationale of 2 days of Chutz La'aretz is that on day 7, you don't really know whether it's the 7th day of Yom Tov or the 6th day of Yom Tov, because you don't know really when Rosh Chodesh was fixed. Because the messages didn't get round. So you're keeping out of doubt, is it this day, is it that day? And it has this knock-on effect down the line. The day 7 of Yom Tov could be day 6 or...
The first 2 days of one day, but simply that the first day at Chutz La'aretz might not be the first day.
Yes, exactly. All that, and that goes all the way down the line. And day 8 of Yom Tov,
shifted by 1.
Yeah, could either be day 7 of Sukkot, or the day 8 of Yom Tov and Chutz La'aretz could actually be Shmini Atzeres as it is in Israel.
Right.
So therefore, there's a doubt over here, and yet we don't take Nulim Esrik and Chutz La'aretz on day 7, on day 8, even though there is an argument to say that it might be only the 7th day of Sukkot.
Right.
Day 9 is Simchas Torah in Chutz La'aretz. It's not, and it's actually, and it's also Sophic Shmini Atzeres, I suppose. I didn't put that in, did I? But in any case, it's certainly not Sukkot. There's no way that it has any elements of Sukkot. We're out of that Sukkot, loop. We're only in that Sukkot loop possibly on day 8 of Yom Tov. That's why the Gemara wanted to know, when can you eat the esrog in Chutz La'aretz? So the arguments were, well, it's day 7 of Sukkot, possibly. If it's day 7 of Sukkot, possibly, maybe I shouldn't eat the esrog until the next day, which is Simchat Torah. Because I don't want to eat an esrog on a day which is really Sukkot, and it might be. On the other hand, since the day 7 of Sukkot, even though the day 8 could be day 7 of Sukkot, we don't actually take the lulav and esrog. And that's the argument for saying that you can actually eat it on the 8th day, since we don't take it, even if technically it could be day 7. Right? Those are the 2 sides of the argument. And if I just, well, I'll leave this on the screen for a moment. The Gemara goes on to say, the Surah of the Kamerema, in Surah, which was one of the towns in Babel, a yeshiva town, they paskened like Merema, which means that they ate their esrogim, if you like, if they wanted to, even on day 8. Even though this question, maybe it's day 7 of Sukkot, you shouldn't, but they paskened in a lenient way, and they ate their esrogim even on day 8, which is Shmini Atzeres or Sukkot 7th day. And Rav Shisha Bereit Rav Idi Ovid Kabaye. But Rav Shisha Bereit Rav Idi, he was knowing to paskin like Abaye. The Hilchos Abaye, says the Gemara. The Gemara says the halach is like Abaye, that you shouldn't do it wait until day 9. In other words, you should be concerned in Chutz La'aretz that this day, no, it's the other way around. Yes, like Abaye. That we are concerned that since day 8 could be day 7 of Sukkot, and it wouldn't be nice to eat an esrog on what could be a day of Sukkot, you should not eat your esrog until Simchas Torah, because that's certainly in the clear, day 9, in other words. That's what the Gemara says is the halacha. Let me just go back again and deal with this problematic conundrum that on Shmini Atzeres and Chutz La'aretz, you've forgotten about all these things, but on Shmini Atzeres and Chutz La'aretz, there is a munig, and the Gemara will discuss this later on in the Gemara. Maybe I won't do this in the Gemara now, it'll be later on in the Gemara. The whole question of sitting on the sukkah in Chutz La'aretz on Shmini Atzeres, which could actually be day 7. And the Gemara suggested you should do it because of this doubt, because it could be day 7 of Sukkot, what we call Shmini Atzeres, even in Chutz La'aretz. It might be a Shmini Atzeres real, in which case there is certainly no din to sit in the Sukkah, but it might also be the real 7th day of Sukkot. And in order to be Yotze, you like the possibility, but it's the 7th day of Sukkot, we should sit in the Sukkah on the 7th day, but you don't make a bracha. You don't make a bracha. This is one of these compromises. To make a bracha and to introduce the Shem Hashem, you have a problem. Maybe it's a bracha she'eina tzricha. Maybe you're making a bracha that isn't necessary. Maybe it's really Shmini Atzeres, and there's no din of sukkah. And to make a bracha on something which isn't really a mitzvah is a very serious matter. So don't make a bracha, but how much does it hurt you to sit in the sukkah? If you're going to eat at home, you can eat in the sukkah, big deal. So therefore you sit in the sukkah, and that's essentially you've accomplished everything you need to do. If it really is sukkah day 7, you're sitting in the sukkah. If it isn't, well, you didn't make a bracha, so you haven't done anything wrong. So that's the reason normally given for us sitting in the sukkah day 7. As I say, customs emerged, some of them vigorously, particularly amongst the Hasidim, I think, not to sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, which is really in opposition to what we learn in the Gemara. And the question is, how did this emerge? And actually, you can find already in some of the Medrashim and in some of the Kabbalistic works, discussions about not being in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. So what's happened is other sources have somehow intervened to take over what seems to be the ruling in the Talmud. The ruling in the Talmud is that you should sit in the sukkah the whole day of Shmini Atzeres in the same way as you did on the 6th day and the 5th day, because it's a Sophic 7th day. So you should do it a Sophic L'chumra. Don't make a bracha, but sit. Just don't make a bracha. And that is the Gemara's idea. That's the Gemara's halacha. The question is, why didn't the Gemara also ask you to take Arba Minim on the 7th day? For the same reason that it could be on Shmini Atzeres, for the same reason that it could be the 7th day of Sukkot. You could take it without a bracha, couldn't you? And if you don't want to make a bracha, pick up the lulav and esrog, rattle them around. What's the big deal? And then at least, if it really is the 7th day of Sukkot, and I don't really know if it is, I don't need the Shmini Atzeres, if it really is the 7th day of Sukkot, then there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. And why shouldn't I do it? What do I lose? Many answers are given to this. Actually, one interesting answer could be that if it's really Shmini Atzeres, there's a downside. Supposing it isn't. Supposing the day of the 8th day of Chutz, which we're saying is a safek, is it the day 7th of Sukkot or Shmini Atzeres? Or is it Shmini Atzeres? Supposing HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that that day is Shmini Atzeres. I mean, who knows? But let's say HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows it's Shmini Atzeres. Then he looks down and he sees all these Jews picking up a lulav and esrog because of the safek. And on that day, you might well want to say that the lulav and esrog should be muktzah, and you shouldn't be able to pick them up at all. Why? Because, in fact, other than day 1, which is Doraisa, all the other days of Yom Tov are midrabanon in the Chutz La'aretz. And if they're drabanon, and there's no mitzvah to pick them up on Shmini Atzeres, then you're actually taking something, you might as well take up a stone or a rock or a drill or something. So you might be holding on to muktzah. So therefore they said, don't take lulav and esrog, because it could be Shmini Atzeres. I know it could be the 7th day of Sukkot, but the risk that we might be doing an issur, a transgression, is there if it were Shmini Atzeres. That's not the same as sitting in the sukkah. There's nothing muktzah about sitting in the sukkah. Supposing it's Shmini Atzeres, really, and you're sitting on the sukkah on something which is really Shmini Atzeres, big deal. What are you doing? Are you breaking the sukkah? Are you carrying the sukkah along the street? You're not. You're allowed to, on the 3rd day of Pesach, sit in a garden shed. You can do it on the 5th day of. You can do whatever you want. If your sukkah is like a garden shed, why can't you sit in the garden shed on Shmini Atzeres? So there's no muktzah violation involved if it really were Shmini Atzeres. So that's one of the reasons that's given to distinguish between the two. Another reason is that it's more blatant. Let's think about Kavod HaYom Tov. I'm not so sure I understand this so much, but on Shmini Atzeres, Sophic, 7th day, of Sukkot and Chutz La'aretz, if you're sitting in your sukkah, some people would say you're sitting in the sukkah. You know why? It's quite warm outside. You know, it's like your conservatory. You're sitting in the sukkah. You could sit in that sukkah any day of the year because it's your summer house. So you decided to sit on the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. It's no more than a random decision. It's not blatantly because you are making a point that today is Sukkot. Because you quite often sit in your summer house, don't you? Well, if you don't, then there's a bit of a problem. But if you do quite often sit in your summer house, you could say you could sit in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, and it wouldn't be a blatant contradiction to Shmini Atzeres, because if today really is Shmini Atzeres, again, the suffix, what are you doing sitting in the sukkah? I am not sitting in the sukkah. This is my summer house. I'm allowed to sit in my summer house, even if it's Shmini Atzeres. I can sit in my summer house if it's Simchas Torah. I can sit in here anytime I want. It's comfortable. So it's not blatantly a contradiction to the possibility that the day is really Shmini Atzeres and you shouldn't sit in the sukkah. However, contrast that with the Lulav and Esrog. Do you generally pick up a Lulav and Esrog on the 15th of December, you know, on Hanukkah or any day of the year? Of course not. The only time you ever pick up a Lulav and Esrog is on Sukkot. Who would randomly decide that I generally enjoy picking up vegetation, which happens to include an Esrog and a Lulav? So if you pick up a Lulav and Esrog, it blatantly demonstrates that you're doing something because it's Sukkot. It's very blatant. And to blatantly demonstrate Sukkot, when there's a suffix that today Shmini Atzeres are not Sukkot, impugns the honor of Shmini Atzeres. It's, you know, it's like poking someone in the eye. Yeah, today may be Shmini Atzeres, so what? I know I'm not supposed to be taking the elimination Shmini Atzeres, but dafka I am. I'm picking up these species and I'm doing it. And I'm doing it because of a possibility, but still, on the grounds that it might be Shmini Atzeres, it's an insult to Shmini Atzeres to blatantly pick up a sukkah's function. But sitting in the sukkah is not a blatant contradiction. Now, actually, that's very much more difficult to justify in Chutz La'aretz. And we're talking about Chutz La'aretz, but I mean Chutz La'aretz in Europe, because it's often cold and uncomfortable. So if I were living in Spain, which is also Chutz La'aretz, and the weather was nice, always, around Sukkot, then I might well be able to say that sitting in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres is not a blatant demonstration of sukkah, because here in Spain, I often sit in my summer house at this time of year, and I'm only doing that here. But when it comes to, I don't know, Canada, to say you're doing the same thing is ludicrous. I mean, you're normally in a nice warm home, and they have to wear on 14 furs, and you move into a sukkah, you know, and you've got ice all over your nostrils, and you say to yourself, this is not a blatant demonstration that today is sukkah. No, I normally like going out in my great big seal skin and sit in a freezing place. So, you know, I generally do this on any day of the year. It's very difficult to swallow that as an explanation. So that would not be a very good explanation. And what I'm trying to do is to give you some excuses for this difference. But it's sometimes not a difference that people note when you're in Chutz La'aretz, but it's a blatant question why Sukkah is taken more seriously on Shmini Atzeres and the Arba Minim are completely rejected, even though in theory it could be day 7 of Sukkot. And maybe the reason we don't ask that question is because so many of us already in Chutz La'aretz have this minhag of abandoning the sukkah very early. And maybe the most we do is make Kiddush on the evening before, or, you know, go in, are coming back from shul after davening and Shmini Atzeres very quickly, and then we leave the sukkah completely. So it does look to us in Chutz La'aretz as though we're not doing the mitzvah of sukkah at all on our Shmini Atzeres. But as we go in the Gemara, you will see that the Gemara takes seriously sitting in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres, just without a bracha.
There's one more question. Is there the same discussion about the second day of Yontif, the beginning? Because of Musaf, you would be saying brachas levatola because it's not really, it's Chol HaMoed already.
Correct. I mean, on Shmini Atzeres, we will anyway say a Musaf. Even in Chutz La'aretz, whether it's the 7th day of Sukkot or Shmini Atzeres, we would say But as you notice, in Musaf and Chutzaros, we have a more complicated, the interpolated carbonas that we put in the Musaf Amid are more complicated. And we mentioned those. And in the Kriyas HaTorah, in Chol HaMoed, we'll have like Yom Chamishim and Yom HaShishi, as if we are totally confused as to which day it is. Halachically, that's the case. We are totally confused. Even though we have a fixed calendar, it's one of those states of mind. We pretend that we're confused, even though we know what is right nowadays. We know really when is Rosh Chodesh. It's all been worked out and it's astronomically correct. But we maintain this this pretense as a minhag avosenu yadenu to those days when we didn't know really when Rosh Chodesh was, and therefore which day was the first and which was the second. We maintain that that pretense.
Yeah. Interesting.
All right, so that was a little bit messy, but I mean the general picture is there. We'll go and talk a little bit more about the sukkah and sitting in on the seventh day. We'll get into that topic, please God, next week. Okay, so thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Talk is great. Thank you so much.